The residents of the city of Johannesburg are now living in fear after shocking incidents of gas explosions and fire that claimed dozens of lives. The latest gas explosion has left many wondering what else could go wrong. Good evening, my name is Sizwe Mpofu Walsh, and welcome to Unfiltered. Many unfortunate events in the city do not get publicized. Observers say they have warned the city for many years about the looming crisis, but no action has been taken. Joining us for a discussion tonight are Nthatisi, Modingoane, spokesperson of the City of Johannesburg, Gundo Maswime, lecturer in the Department of Civil Engineering to give an engineering eye at the University of Capetown, and Sandile Nombeni from the South African Water Caucus to give us an eye from civil society. First, let's have a look at this insert produced by Jacqueline Maphala.
I'm looking for my daughter. She stays in this building.
Our viewers want to know, where is government? Where is accountability?
Government is here, that's why we are here. And that's why we are here to understand what has happened, what needs to be done.
Catastrophe envelops the city of Johannesburg in a series of staggering events that have pulled a sharper focus on the multifaceted and unprecedented socio-economic and political crisis the city is facing. Africa's economic hub that sees itself as a world-class city remains a time bomb for unsuspecting residents, many of whom say they are yet to feel the experience of living in a world-class city. Unmaintained infrastructure, poor service delivery, inadequate governance, poor urban management, the lack of bylaw enforcement, increased scourge of hijacked, unsafe buildings, the list is endless. In the latest incidents concerning a fire that razed a hijacked building, 77 people have lost their lives, including 7 children.
Johannesburg was never built for so many people. Johannesburg was built for a few people, and democracy came in, and there was freedom of movement of people to go and move and live where they could and where they wanted to live.
Experts say the unstable politics of coalition governments and corruption, which the city has not been spared from, also contribute to the city failing to meet its mandate towards the people.
It's basically a conflagration of the problems. One is rural urban migration, which is not being properly managed in the cities, what our politicians normally refer to as, urbanization. So they are aware of the problem, but the question is, what are they doing with it? They're not doing anything with it, because doing something with it would mean adequate provision of housing. It would mean proper urban town planning that is absent. It would mean revitalization of CBDs and other urban spaces. It's not happening.
The city of Johannesburg introduced its 2040 growth and development strategy, through which it intends to attract investment and develop into a diverse city in which its residents experience a high quality of life. But with unstable politics and various interests hampering its realization, it's not clear whether this vision will be achieved. In the meantime, the residents can only pray that they do not fall victim to another life-threatening disaster lurking in the shadows.
And they must never make.
Welcome back to Unfiltered. Let's delve into this question with our panel. Mr. Nombeni, can I start with you? Through the Water Caucus, the South African Water Caucus, you're part of a connection and a collection of organizations and individuals which experience the crises of service delivery and our challenges of infrastructure firsthand. Can you give us some insight into some of the experiences that you've seen on the ground with the infrastructure crisis happening in Johannesburg?
No, I'd first like to thank you for the invitation to bring me this side so that I can share the perspective in terms of what community members are facing.
Pleasure. Welcome to the show.
And as I'm here, I'm just back from Modingoane today, this afternoon, from an air quality meeting conference, 17th Lekgotla by the DFFE. And on my way, You know, you'd see like Polokwane is a tourism province. Polokwane is an agricultural province. But at the same, Polokwane is one of the highly disadvantaged rural provinces of the country. And you'd be surprised that in as much as Polokwane is one of the major contributors into the South African economy, Polokwane is also facing water challenges. It's one of the highest water-stressed provinces in our country. And you'd be surprised that the community members of Polokwane do not have access to sufficient water. But there's mining companies in Polokwane that are not paying tax. Those mining companies, they are destroying the environment of Polokwane. They are polluting the water of Polokwane. Whilst the community members, the actual beneficiaries of Polokwane, do not have access to water.
Do you see any similarities there with the situation in Joburg?
It's not that it's similarities. What is happening in Joburg is happening in Polokwane, is happening in the Eastern Cape, is happening in the Vaal. Where I stay in the Vaal, I live next to the Vaal River. At my home in the Vaal, like, you can't open windows. The area is so smelling of sewage that the municipalities, like, they intentionally like discharging raw sewer water into the river. When you walk on the streets, everywhere around your Rivers area, your Vereeniging in town, there's so much spillage that is happening from sewer. And even if when you speak about the issue of the pending buildings in Johannesburg, our government has been so neglective of what is actually happening on the ground in communities. And in a sense that I remember early this year there was a public consultation on climate change and so on, a climate change bill and so on. We were in Vereeniging. The portfolio committee, like, what does it say to politicians when they go travel around communities and cities, especially towns, where they see our towns are filthy, there's poor maintenance of our infrastructure, our towns are so dilapidated, they're so dirty. There's a lot that needs to be done.
Indeed, and Mr. Maswime, we've heard a fascinating perspective from Mr. Nombeni about the human cost and the human experience in so many of our cities. A fire at Charlotte Maxeke one month. A road basically explodes another month on Lilian Ngoyi. Two terrible ways to honor those two people, by the way. A burning building, a water crisis. I'm just wondering, is this part of a broader, deeper crisis that we need to talk about? Because it feels like we talk about one crisis and then we forget it and we go to another crisis and forget it. But how worried are you that Joburg, at least, is actually in the grip of a deeper descent into a real infrastructure disaster here?
Yeah, thanks, Sizwe. Yeah, I think you have put it well, that instead of looking at each individual incident in isolation, there is a need to really reflect, to stand back and reflect and say, we can see that there is a pattern, and this pattern has been repeating itself over and over again. So it might just mean that we have reached that point where some of the challenges of the handover process way back in 1999, when local government was formulated for the first time, when it was constituted, that handover process had some, there were issues there that were not addressed. The first one is that you were handing over to a new government that had two engineers in their police machinery, just two engineers. Fortunately, Joburg is lucky because one of them Mr. Trevor Fowler, ended up becoming the municipal manager of Johannesburg, of the city of Johannesburg. And those were the years where the Soweto was paved, the streets were paved, it was no longer the streets of Soweto. But the pattern that we also saw was that there were departments within the city of Johannesburg, for example, the geotechnical unit, that had about 20 employees who were engineers. Then when the transition happened, for whatever reason, they probably panicked. Within 5 years, there would have been less than 5 geotechnical engineers in the employ of Johannesburg. Some of the databases of the information that was collected over years, projects that were done, some in conjunction with with Wits University, to profile the area geotechnically and geologically. Those databases cannot be found in City of Johannesburg. So some of the people might have left with them and then used them as consultants from outside. There's a possibility that that could have happened. But there is a lot that is not known, that was not handed over when government changed hands. So for that reason, even if you had a huge maintenance budget, you might have ended up maintaining what is not so important, what is not on the critical path. So what the city should come out to say is, do we know exactly what we have and where? City of Capetown, for example, there has not been so much of a transition there. They have almost continued to run the city. But even then, when events happen outside that 15-kilometer radius from the mountain, realize that sometimes they will spend days just looking for a valve, which tells you that they may not have a full database of all their assets. So this is an endemic problem across the municipalities. Unfortunately, in the city of Johannesburg, there's been a lot of tunneling. There's been a lot of different gas pipes. Some are very old, coming from the 50s, even from the 40s, 1940s. So we have got a big problem of asset management in most of the big cities and even in the smaller towns.
That's a fascinating point, because I think many people would assume that the city knows what it has and the problem is implementing with that. But if the problem is so deep that actually just appreciating the full asset base of the city is still a difficult task, then it in some ways makes sense why it seems like the city gets caught by surprise by these events just as much as the citizens. And I guess that asset register is not an easy thing to necessarily develop. I was looking at the Joburg property portfolio, and they have something like 28,000 properties. So one can only imagine how complex that asset register actually is to get one's head around. But I mean, surely someone has to get their arms around that problem of having a panoramic view of the city's infrastructure.
Yes, you're absolutely right. This is not a small city, and I think you would understand that those asset registers, these days, you don't just put an asset and say there's this building, you have 28,000 buildings. But that is not all. That's not all of it. Those assets also need to be unbundled so that you can say inside this building there is this mechanical unit which is this old, because the way the mechanical unit ages and the way it's maintained is not the same as the actual building of brick and mortar itself. So that unbundling helps because you'll find some things are more on the electrical, mechanical, and so on. So they have to be maintained by people that specialize in that discipline, that engineering discipline.
Absolutely.
But also,
absolutely. I will come back to you, Mr. Maswime, but Mr. Nombeni, some people have begun to suggest that, and this builds on the earlier point, that there are powerful people who are actually benefiting from this lack of service delivery. It's not just a government that can't achieve its goals, although that is part of it, but actually there are private players, maybe corrupt politicians, who are actually benefiting from this crisis. To what extent do you think that your experiences with communities either prove or disprove that idea?
I would agree with the idea, as you're saying it, because one of the major challenges that we've had with this government, and as the gentleman was speaking about the transition of the departments in terms of how they should be looking at collecting data, like their asset data, in terms of what is there, what is missing, what needs to be maintained, and so on.
Yeah.
When our government came in with the system of benefiting the black people through the BE system, one of the major setbacks that they did was opening up for community members to be able to apply for tenders. Because in the tendering system, that's where most of the big players, especially politicians, they put their influence. And as a country, recently we've had so many scandals of projects, like mega projects, where there's been corruption. Huge funds that have been chowed by individuals, and they've never been taken into account. And the reason I'm saying this is because before the transition of the government, not that I'm saying apartheid was good, but during apartheid things were done in a proper way, and our infrastructure, the apartheid was able to look at how to do maintenance of the infrastructure. Today we are facing an employment crisis in South Africa. People are not working, but when you go to departments, they'll tell you that people are not, they're short-staffed. Why are they short-staffed whilst they are able, why shouldn't they create work? So that they become the ones as the government who are able to look at doing a data collection in terms of knowing what to do, knowing the maintenance that is needed. Because if you look at most of the jobs that are done by these tenderpreneurs today, when you compare the streets which are done by these tenderpreneurs and the streets which were done by the government itself during the apartheid, there's a huge difference. When you look at the housing, like the housing development issue, during the apartheid, I live in one of the old homes where in Guatemala, like my grandmother's house, was built by the apartheid system. It's still intact, it's still in good condition. But then the houses that are being built today, they easily crack. And one of the other challenge of which it has been a question to me with regards to when you look at this Egoli explosion situation, I believe that as a gas exploration company, for them to be able to produce whatever gas and whatever, they need to do an application for dealing with a mineral, because gas is a mineral. They need to make an application to the Department of Mineral Resources. What have they been reporting to the Department of Mineral Resources if their pipes are going to be exploding right now?
Can we put that to Mr. Maswime, because one of the key challenges facing the city does seem to be this underground tunneling system, the system of pipes which connect both water infrastructure and gas infrastructure. And apparently there are all these tunnels just under Joburg that you may have more insight into than I do. Can you give us some insight into the problems of that system? Because we saw with the Lillian Ngoyi Street, and with just recently, a few days ago, another gas explosion, there seems to be some underground problem in Joburg infrastructure that connects these crises.
Yes, the tunneling system was mostly for the reason of getting stormwater out of the city faster, because when an area is built up, you have got roofs, you've got paving. So that accumulation of water with time becomes floods, and in some areas where the slope allows, the water will flow so fast that it becomes very destructive. So to manage that, they built a network of tunnels so that the water can find its way underground quicker. So that there's no problem with that, and it's done across the world, especially in cities which are generally flat. And when they model the catchment area for water, they can see the water will not dissipate or get out of the city fast enough. So the tunneling system was fine. But also in the tunneling system, you also take the opportunity to put other pipes for other services. So those gas pipes you will find are mounted within. These are big tunnels that you can fit a small car in some of them. So they put some pipes. In some tunnels, they also put electricity cables. So we have not really been told with the first explosion, certainly, what had sparked the explosion. But what we know is that the methane gas itself cannot explode with the kind of pressure that's there. The gas could not explode spontaneously. There should have been a spark. The explanation that is plausible is that it's likely that there was a spark triggered by the electricity cables that are there, but those cables would have been tampered with. There's been incidences of the cables being stolen in those tunnels. So if they are tampered with, if you check the timing of that explosion, it was between 5 o'clock and 3 minutes past 5, which was the time when the electricity was coming back. So without any other conclusive explanation from the city that is convincing enough, I think that would have been the problem. But even then, you need to know what is inside the tunnel, how old is it, when does it need to be replaced, what are the risks that the combination of what you have underground is.
Indeed. Let's go to a break, Mr. Maswime, and then we will come back to that conversation. We're asking a deeper question as to whether there is a wider infrastructural collapse happening around our ears in Johannesburg. What is behind that? Who are the people who benefit from that? And ultimately, how can we arrest the decline? Stick with us. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Unfiltered. We're discussing the infrastructural crisis that's confronting Johannesburg as evidenced by recent events, from a water crisis to fatal fires and from the cracking of roads to fires engulfing hospitals. Mr. Nombeni, as the South African Water Caucus, you have placed great emphasis on water, its importance to African life in South Africa at the moment. What improvements have you seen in access to water, or do you think that things have been going backwards in terms of the challenges of water in South Africa, and particularly in Johannesburg for its residents?
Instead of going forward, I think the country is going backwards. The reason I'm saying this, we recently coming from a very alarming state where there was a cholera outbreak less than about three months ago. The state of our water, we're not sure about it in terms of how good it is. And
have you, as the Water Caucus, by the way, seen anything in your work that is alarming you about the consumption of water and people falling sick after that maybe hasn't reached the headlines?
The thing is, it has reached the headlines in a sense that as a national coordinator, like Water Caucus exists in all 9 provinces of the country. And about a month ago, one of the people one of our comrades in KZN sent me a video of a person who's still using like river water for consumption, for cooking, drinking and eating. They share the water with the animals. They do have a municipality, they do have the government. What are the governments doing, like the local municipalities? And if they're not reporting issues to the treasury, to the national government, to the national departments of water, to the ministers of these departments, then what are they there for? What are they saying when they are communicating? On a yearly basis, South Africa, like we have the budget months. What is where is that budget going if people are still drinking water directly from the river? And if you can claim, usually, I think it was last week, Minister Sizwe Mpofu was giving a report of the Val mega project where they are doing rehabilitation of the old water treatment plants and stuff and other pump stations. The budget they spent there, it's so huge. But because people don't understand what actually supposed to be happening to the budgets. We become happy when we go to see the minister. And one of the sad parts is that the South African, I guess we as South Africans, we do not understand actually water politics. Because there's a difference between, I believe, in my own view, that when you speak about politics, we speak about our well-being, our survival, our existence. And if public participation processes, they tend to be a rented crowd, where you'd find community members wearing ANC. It's only ANC members who are brought to these meetings. And when they get there, they speak, it's only people who are looking for tenders. Whereas those platforms, public participation, public hearings, are actually meant for us community members to be able to make comments and submissions in terms of what do we want, the role we're supposed to be playing as the receivers of services from government.
Let me put that to Mr. Maswime, because a lot of interesting and important points made there, but I want to pick up on one of them, because we heard recently in Joburg that there was going to be this massive repair of a Rand water system. And we just needed to, take the pain for 2 days of no water, because after that things would really get much better. And I must say, if anything, things have got worse since that repair for the residents of Joburg, who just have now accepted, like so many other residents in our country, that, well, water just won't come out of the taps all the time anywhere. Can you give us an assessment from your engineering expertise, Mr. Maswime, about whether we're moving in the right direction or the wrong direction in terms of water infrastructure in the country?
Yeah, thanks. It's a complex question to answer, but I'll simplify it like this. I think especially within the intellectual community, there has been a shying away from really capturing the successes that have been achieved since 1994.
Sure.
Yeah, and I can safely say that based on reports, independent reports from World Bank even, and other structures, you will find that the numbers are different. But we had less than 40% of the population having access to electricity, and that has gone into the 90s. We had about 67% of people having access to water in 1994, and that number has also gone into the early towards the mid-90s. And even if you check the road infrastructure, the number of new roads that were constructed. I mean, if anyone that is sitting at home asks themselves if they were at least 10 years old by 1994, did you have electricity? Do you have it now? Of course, the disparities will be different with the races. So a lot has been done. In fact, very few countries have been able to register the kind of infrastructure rollout that South Africa experienced since 1994. However, there were two challenges that came with that. The first one was that maintenance took a backseat, not from 1994, from 1976. There was a decision, of course, because of the things that were happening then, to divert budgets into defense and policing and so on. But for a government that had no experience whatsoever, and in fact, until 1992, the number of engineers that were being trained in South Africa, in fact, from the other races, they would have been less than 50 coming out of the universities. So that was opened in 1992.
I think
so you can see
what's interesting about that, Mr. Maswime, is I think what you say is important to give us context, because we can't just assume that things are always in crisis, and there haven't been gains made. But what confuses me is that we made some important early gains, but it feels like we've gone through a period of reversal of those gains, and it's not clear how we did so much of the hard work only for basics to then, in our hands, come apart. That's the sense I get. So there's no doubt that electricity was rolled out, that water was rolled out, that roads were rolled out. But once we did that, we failed to consolidate that progress and are now paying the price of the reversal. It feels, but I may be wrong.
No, you're correct. You are correct. In fact, in my opinion, the real reason for that, there has been some reversals. The first one is that our infrastructure was so poorly located and under-maintained, and we were building a lot of new public infrastructure. The second reason is that we had a period where engineers left government and new engineers did not join the state, went into the private sector. So it's good for the private sector to come and do individual projects, but to have an engineer as the client or in government helps, because the engineer has got a round perspective of knowing the interconnectedness between different infrastructure units and is able to prioritize properly. The second challenge we have, which your guest has alluded to in terms of civic education and influencing budgets, is the fact that with the IDP process of public consultations came a situation when in many cases, the role of the engineer in local government space was diminished, and the role of the community or the politicians was accentuated. And that was going to happen because the mayor is employed by the community, and the mayor employs the engineer. So the engineer will have his priorities that are based on science. The community has their own priorities, which are based on their immediate needs. So infrastructure that's underground, that's the last thing that the community is thinking about. There is no problem of water until water doesn't come out, or until we have an outbreak of cholera or something like that. So, and if you check also most of the gates, they were done during the period before the current legislative framework was fully mounted. This is before 2003. So you check the Municipal Systems Act, Municipal MFMA, the Municipal Finance Management Act, Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act, all the important acts that have a direct impact on the rollout of public infrastructure, the maintenance thereof. They came in by the mid-2000s, most of them were there. Things started slowing down there, and more engineers left government because the process of rolling out infrastructure or delivering it became a highly administrative and a highly audited process. Before 1994, procurement was not even in the constitution. So each region, each municipality was doing as they wish. And in fact, I shudder to think the quantum of corruption then compared to now, which one would have been worse, because there was really a very little legislation regulating procurement.
Let's leave it there for now, Mr. Maswime.
And you roll out infrastructure. Yeah.
Absolutely. We're going to go to a break. It's a very interesting perspective on exactly what got us here from an engineering perspective, and also interesting to hear from the community participation perspective how the noble ideals of integrating community participation have been in many ways subverted. We're trying to get to the bottom of a wider infrastructure crisis that seems to be engulfing the city of Johannesburg, with terrible events following each other. When we come back, we're going to hear from city officials as well as delve deeper into the causes behind these crises. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with more after the break. Welcome back to Unfiltered. We're discussing a wider infrastructure crisis that seems to be engulfing the city of Johannesburg. Joining us now is spokesperson for the city of Johannesburg, Mr. Nthatisi Modingoane. And Mr. Modingoane, thank you very much for joining us. Can I just start by asking you, we've seen a lot of events of late affecting the city's infrastructure. To what extent do you think there's a deeper and a wider infrastructural crisis outside of these events which are grabbing the headlines?
No, thank you very much. Let me start by saying and giving a context to say from the city side, we are aware that the infrastructure that was built many years in the city was not built to cater for the influx and the growth that the city is experiencing. So, and coupled with that is this a number of incidents that are happening, which are vandalism, which is cable theft, issues of illegal mining, and so forth. They all have some form of impact on the durability and the strength of the infrastructure going forward.
How worried are you about the city's capacity to respond to those challenges? Should we be concerned that we're going to see more of these crises, or do you think that the city has it in hand?
No, the city has a plan. You must remember that the city in 2011 introduced a plan of a massive infrastructure upgrade, which was a 10-year plan, which looked at investing in the region of about 10 billion per annum to deal with issues of infrastructure backlog. There has been a number of challenges, including COVID and so forth, that really set us back a little bit. But we never stopped to look at areas that are critical, that needs a massive infrastructure upgrade. In the recent budget, for example, the city has budgeted over 7 billion only on infrastructure upgrade, so that we are able to respond to the pressures that the in-migration and the population growth is posing on the infrastructure of the city.
So can I ask you, just on the various crises, since we have you here, any update on the causes of the Lilian Ngoyi explosion, and especially what caused the spark in the tunnel, which created the explosion with the methane gas? Are we any closer to understanding that?
No, we're not there yet, because this week the contractor is moving on site to start doing the removal of rubble, so that they can go inside and go deeper and look at some of the issues and interventions. But having said that, you must remember that even the fire in Braamfontein created some doubts in residents' mind in terms of are we sure that we are safe in the city of Johannesburg. So we are looking at all those things, and we are hoping that by the time the constructor resume with construction, we will be able to get closer to understanding most of the challenges that are underground. One of the things is that I must explain is that the city as it is now, when it was built, it was not built to accommodate these sizes. For example, these tunnels that we're talking about, the safest tunnels, were on the side of the road. And as the city grew, we had to expand the road network. And now these tunnels are sitting right in the middle of the street. And one of the things that we're looking at doing is to redesign the safest tunnel throughout the city of Johannesburg, not only looking at the CBD of Johannesburg, but looking at other parts of the city, so that they are in standard with the international norms. That really helps to respond to some of these crises that are unexplainable at the moment.
And can I just ask as well, just in terms of updates, finally, in terms of the rehabilitation and the immediate emergency efforts around the recent fire, what's the latest update on that from the city's perspective as we speak late this evening?
From the city side, we have not yet received back, because we had handed over the building to the SAPS as a crime investigation scene, so that once they have concluded their work, they'll be able to hand it over back to the city, so that the city can look at possible future uses of the building. Because of its heritage significance, we have to engage other role players like your Heritage Association, because you must remember that historically that was where the apartheid government would issue dome passes there and so forth. So we can't just move on and demolish or whatever. There still has to be structural engineers that are moving into the space just to check the integrity of the structures, so that it gives us a sense of how the amount of work that needs to go into that space. But
when do you expect that work to be concluded by?
The work is expected to be concluded once the police give us a go-ahead to access the building, so that we send in structural engineers so that they do the work that we need to do. But you must remember that one of the things, because it also impacts individuals, one of the things that happened yesterday is that we were looking at a alternative site that would house the victims or the survivors from that building. And at one of the sites that is owned by the city yesterday, when the mayor and the city manager and the JMPD went out there, they found that site being hijacked as well, and 23 people were arrested. And these include one of a councillor and one member of the South African Police Services. So
are you at liberty to name the councillor, or tell us more about this councillor that we don't know about?
No, at the moment, the process is not yet there where we can reveal names, because these people are still suspected. They have not even appeared before the court of law, and we haven't even gone through the internal council processes of going through the integrity committee, so that we are able to tell the public of Johannesburg as to what have we seen and why do we suspect that individual council.
Absolutely. So sorry, I interrupted you just when you were giving us the timeline for the recovery efforts, and when you think you'll be done with the efforts after the SAPS.
Yes, what needs to happen there, because we need to get in structural designers and then work with the South African Heritage Association, because the building was declared as a heritage site, there's a certain standards that we need to uphold in terms of any rehabilitation. So we will not be able to really give clear time frames for now until we have access to the site itself.
Okay, absolutely. We'll come back and bring our panel in, having heard from the city for the final segment of our conversation. We're inquiring into the infrastructural crisis that appears to be engulfing Johannesburg, with event lurching to terrible event. And when we come back, we'll offer some concluding thoughts and also think through how we can surmount these infrastructural challenges. Stay with us. Welcome back to Unfiltered. We're inquiring into the extent of the City of Johannesburg's infrastructure crisis and basically asking the question, Are we on the edge of some kind of infrastructure collapse, given the shocking stories that we hear month to month of devastating infrastructure events? Mr. Maswime, can I come to you? We heard from the city just an update on the situation. Can I get your reaction to that update from an engineering perspective, and whether you think we should be satisfied that the city is on top of this series of crises?
Yeah, surely after you have had the previous explosion and the damage of the streets, and noting that right now that has not been fixed, and then you have had a building burn down, and nothing has started because we are still waiting for the police. I think there has to be a certain level of agility in the administrative processes, in such a way that when we say we are man-centric, we are really, or whatever to be, we prioritize people even in our actions. So it is a concern that the engineers seem to wait in the flanges for the administrative processes to unfold, instead of having the engineering process lead the way. So it's almost like having very elaborate hospital processes of documenting, but it takes so long that the patient dies in the process. So I would really say that if it requires a review in standard operating procedures, local government needs to really reflect very deep and say, when we have had a disaster like this, really, how long should we be waiting to build? They elaborate procurement processes that can take up 8 months, sometimes more than a year. Are we supposed really to go through those processes? If we are struggling to do that, why do we not have a state construction or consulting company which can quickly move in, do these designs, and have the work start already?
And Mr. Maswime, can I ask you on that? So sorry to come in, but I'm just interested in your perspectives, because I hear your opinion quite a lot, and you clearly have a lot of knowledge of the infrastructural crisis. If there was one lever you could pull that could solve some of these infrastructural crises, what do you think is the longest lever we can pull that would get us out of this crisis the quickest?
There are two things that I would say we need to do. First, I know it's ambitious, but we need to dissociate certain aspects of infrastructure development from the political process. It's like maintenance. I don't see the political input in maintenance, and the fact that politicians generally would hardly ever be engineers. That is the first. Right. One. The second one is the state capacity. That we need to build state capacity and stop actually talking about it. And the one way of doing that is to mount a fully fledged construction business that is run by the state, almost like it's run in what is public entrepreneurial management. So it's even though it's not geared towards profit, but it has got the efficiencies that you could find from a company that is geared to profit. That would be my
interesting proposals. Mr. Nombeni, from your perspective, what do you think is the one thing we can do to try and improve the situation from the perspective of your caucus?
The one thing that I think our government needs to do, one, there's a huge communication gap between communities and the government, and besides that, looking into government departments alone. I find it funny because in most of the meetings and the consultations where we usually engage with government, you find that all government departments, they work in isolation. Department of Mineral Resources doesn't sit down with Department of Water and Sanitation. It doesn't sit down with the Department of minerals and energy, officials are not actually, they don't actually know how to communicate themselves. And for them to be able to come up with proper plans, all the departments needs to have a way in terms of where they create their communication, like kill away their communication barrier. Because that's one point where you'd find that what is said in the climate change bill, it's vis-a-vis what the Department of Minerals and Energy is saying. So they're doing the government's points of views are too different in terms of when you listen to what they're all committing to climate change bills and so on. As that the spokesperson gentleman was saying that this is what we have as the city. But the city and the DFFE department at the national level, they don't sit together on the table and have a proper discussion in terms of how they can work things out and also share the sharing of the resources and the taking of the responsibilities. Everyone wants to isolate themselves in terms of taking responsibilities. The reason I'm raising this, my last point.
I'm going to have to cut you there because I need to bring in our final guest, Mr. Modingoane. We have a minute to close, but could you in 30 seconds just respond to some of the interventions made by our panelists?
Yes. The panelist that spoke about the procurement processes being too cumbersome, yes, is correct. And as the city, we are trying to shorten that. We have introduced the e-tendering system, which we hope will fast-track some of the processes.
Right. What about communication cross-purposes, just as we round off from Mr. Nombeni?
Yeah, the gentleman that talks about communication, yes, it's key, something that we take very serious. And the issues of intergovernmental relations are very key. When we had the disaster in Marshalltown, we did indicate that all role players will be coming together and try to resolve these issues, including the issue of the taxi rank.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for, but let me thank both city officials from the engineering perspective, Mr. Maswime, Mr. Nombeni, from your perspective from the South African Water Caucus. Are we in a looming crisis in the city of Johannesburg with massive event after massive event following us? Can we dig ourselves out of this crisis? And how deep can this crisis go? These are some of the questions we've asked tonight. Let's continue this conversation on social media and make sure to stick with Unfiltered News, Unfiltered Views, and Unfiltered Conversations. We'll see you for the next installment next week.